Today is the most critical tip I can give to Lightroom users: how to back up your catalog, how to work with your files safely so that you don't lose your files or the work that you've done on them. Hudson here, welcome to Approaching the Scene. Today we're going to talk about a couple of critical tips that I think, if there's just one thing you know about Lightroom, it should be these two critical tips. Making sure that you don't lose your files from Lightroom's database, and making sure that that database is backed up in case anything goes haywire. So I'm going to talk about both those things today. I've had a lot of people asking me about getting started in editing software. I think everyone knows I've been a Lightroom user since version 1. I also use On1 Photo Raw quite a bit, but Lightroom's generally at the base core of my 20 plus, 25 years of photos that are stored on my system. So I'm going to talk about how I make sure that I don't lose any of that work from those decades of photography. And hopefully that translates to you in a way that lets you be safer as you play around in Lightroom and explore its cataloging capabilities and its editing capabilities and organizing capabilities. Before we jump in and do that, I want to thank everyone who's been supporting the channel, and I want to invite everyone to the free office hours, just a big photography powwow. Next one's going to be on May 11th. And we're going to go through your spring photo images. We're inviting you to submit images for the office hours. You can join us on Zoom Interactive, or you can watch it on YouTube Live, or the recording on YouTube Live. So you can upload an image, add a question to the discussion, and sign up at hudsonhenry.com/office hours. Again, that's just a free big photographic powwow with my good friends and frequent regulars, along with new people every single month. So I hope you'll join. I hope I'll see you there, hudsonhenry.com/office hours. Again, links to all the gear that I use are updated constantly at hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. And I really appreciate all of you who've been using those links and helping support the content that I create here. Okay, so let's jump in. I'm sharing my screen here. I've got myself kind of minimized down here in the corner, but you can actually see me working and talking to you. And I'm in a collection in here in Lightroom right now. This is kind of my big grandmaster collection of a lot of my favorite images. But I have a memory card right here out of, I believe it's out of my Z7 II, and I'm just going to stick it in the front of my PC here. I'm going to go to import. I want to import some images, and I'm going to talk about sort of file handling. I tend to like to keep my images as original Nikon RAW files, NEF files, so I don't choose to copy them as a DNG. I just choose to copy them off that memory card. It automatically saw my memory card from my Z7 II and opened it. I could navigate to that. This is the source. I'm going to be putting it into my photo library. Actually, I'm going to put it with my working photos on my little 2 terabyte drive. I have one of these Samsung T7s that I advocate all of you use, really fast SSD drives connected into a Thunderbolt 3 port on the back of my PC. It's a very, very fast port. And I like to work with images over that really fast connection to that SSD and then archive them to my Drobo system. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that. I've used it before. So I'm jumping over here. You could also go down here and say I want to go to another destination, and you can go into the Finder in Mac or your Explorer in Windows and go down to photography and working photos and select that folder, and all of a sudden you see we're at 2 terabyte in the working photos directory. And these are just some images from around home. I was photographing my kids out in the yard. It was actually for a video on autofocus. But I got some fun shots of them playing with their little friend Ransom and his mom Laura and my aunt all out in the yard. And so, these are sort of around home images. I'm going to move myself here. I'm going to close down this hard drive, have a look at where we're actually putting this in the 2 terabyte SSD, the T7 drive, in my working photos 2021 folder. And I'm going to go ahead, I want them in there, and I want to say into the subfolder, and I'm going to just call it 2021 underscore around home. Boom. All right, so it's going to go into that folder right there. And I have sort of a naming convention that I've created a template. You can always create your own template. I'm going to be doing a whole video series with Rick LePage on organizing your images, and I'll cover that kind of thing when we get into there. But my custom text is always the camera. I'm going to say Z72, Z72, and then I will say the shoot is kids. Boom. And so you can see the photos are going to be the date, Z72, kids, and a number series. Metadata I like to use. I have my own 2021 metadata setup that'll just add copyright information. I can just say home here, you know, for keywords, Portland, OR. There you go. Boom, Pacific Northwest. That kind of adds location info. And all this is going to do is it's going to take those photos from the memory card and put them into the catalog. Remember, when you work in Lightroom, there's a catalog, and Lightroom has to know where the images are located and stored. When it brings these images into the computer, as it's importing right now, it's going to bring them in and it's going to build previews. You can dictate in those settings as you import whether you want standard size previews or full resolution one-to-one previews or minimal previews, but it's building a little JPEG, it's storing information about the file, and then any editing that you do to that file is going to be stored in a sidecar file along with that image in the folder that you directed. So these images are all coming in, they're being moved onto this little Samsung T7 drive. My Lightroom catalog file is actually a file, it's a database file that Lightroom goes to look for all the information. It's got the preview files for the images. It's got all the information about editing those images and everything. And I store that on a 1 terabyte Samsung T7 drive. And I can move that between Mac and PC. I keep it formatted exFAT. So my laptop is a Mac. My desktop is a PC. And I move this drive back and forth and fire up Lightroom and read the same catalog on both systems, on both computers. And if I opened it on my laptop, it would be exactly where I closed it when it was last opened on the PC. It's pretty amazing how that works. Now, it's really important to keep this catalog backed up. And here's the other thing. Lightroom's a little different than some other editing platforms. So, you know, here we've got our images, and they're right here. If I go in, I'm in the library. Lightroom has develops for editing your images. Map is for geolocation. Books for creating books and sending them off, you know, to Blurb or you know, whoever you want. Slideshows for creating slideshows. Print, obviously for print. Webs for making simple websites. I mostly work in library and develop and print. But, you know, we're not worried about developing our images right here. We're worried about organizing them. And library is where you organize. The right panel is all about information about the images. You can do some really quick develop settings. I almost never do that. You can keyword, look at lists of keywords. You can edit your metadata. You can see I've put my copyright information in there by having that metadata preset. On the left side is all about where they are. You've got some major areas in your catalog. You know, the last import that you just did, that's where we are right now, previous import. There's some collection things, all photographs in your collection, Then there's folders. This is the actual file structure of your computer. And this is my big Drobo, my big giant repository for all of my archived images. And you can see it goes all the way back to 1996. I'm not kidding. There's a lot of years here. There's 25 years of photography archived in here from 2021 to 1996. And that big Drobo is backed up both off-site in the cloud and to another big Drobo here in my studio. But I can go ahead and close that down. Right now I'm working with this little 2 terabyte drive, and we just created this around home folder. It has all these images we just created in it. This is showing me the actual file structure, and the little green light there shows you that that drive is online. You know, if I was to remove that drive, it would just go grayed out. I could still see all of the little previews. And this is where people get in big trouble with their images. They start working in Lightroom, but they have a history of working in, say, Photo Mechanic or in On1 Photo Raw, which works as more just a browser wherever you point it, or Bridge in Photoshop. And they have a system for moving files around as they edit them. Well, they work around in Lightroom a little bit. They import some files to play around with. And then all of a sudden they go moving it in another system. So here I'm just pulling up my Windows Explorer. It's just like Max Finder. And I'm in that 2 terabyte drive in my photography photo, in my working photos, 2021. That's where we just put these. These are these files right here. We just created that today. What if I rename this so that suddenly Lightroom doesn't know where it is. Let's call it underscore or hyphen test. Boom. Now all of a sudden that folder's name has changed. Now watch what happens here. See that little question mark next to the folder? Lightroom doesn't know where those files are anymore. There's a little exclamation point here. Photo is missing. Now Lightroom's lost. You just moved those folders outside of the database. Lightroom doesn't know where they are. If I go to edit them suddenly now and develop, it's all grayed out. I can't do anything because the file could not be found. I still have the JPEG rendering of it, and I run into people in workshops where their whole catalog is just filled with question marks because they've moved their files around outside of Lightroom. So I'm going to give you a trick to avoid this, all right? If you're going to work in Lightroom, you have to commit to it. And you need to commit to a system where you'll understand where your photographs are. When you looked at my big master photo library here on my big Drobo drive, you can see I use years and shoots. Each one of these, you know, if I look at 2020, there's my shoots from 2020, my Kauai workshop, a Z50 dump when I was just testing it out, a 10-stop neutral density filter test, you know, the pandemic photography, just different things I've done, Cottonwood Canyon with my family, you know, Larch Mountain. You can see I just put all of my photos in here. There are 18,600 photos from 2020, a light photography year for me. You can see 2019 had 50,000. I put my photos into these folders and I never move them, the raw files. You know, if I want to export an image to share on the web or something, I export it into some Dropbox folder that I can access from all of my devices, and it's trash, it's throwaway. But my original master files, any PSDs I create to work on in Photoshop or on one or another piece of software, those master files live in that original folder, and I never ever move them unless I'm just sort of working with my archive. So let's say, for example, I have these images. Let's fix this problem right here. Let's put it back to where it's supposed to be. I'm going to get rid of that little test thing. We're going to get these photos back. Boom. I'm just changing the name of the folder back to what it's supposed to be. We haven't moved them. Now all of a sudden this photo's here. If I go to develop it, boom, I've got all my settings. I can change whatever I want. Hit Control Z to undo that, but you get the idea. So, all right, let's go back into the library mode. That folder of images is on this little travel drive of mine, right? I don't always want it to be there. So how do I handle moving that into my Drobo if moving it is going to make Lightroom lose it? Well, it's really simple. I don't ever move photos in my master catalog of master images unless I move them inside of Lightroom. So let's say I wanted to go ahead and move that folder of images of my kids into my 2021 folder. Well, I can just grab it inside Lightroom and drag it from that OneDrive into this folder right here, 2021, and drop it. And watch, you'll see all of a sudden there's a new folder in here, Around Home, and it's growing, and my folder Around Home in the 2 terabyte drive is shrinking until there are no photos left in it. And all those photos are now in my Drobo instead. I've got this grid view. I can go to the grid view to see sort of all the images. I got to be in the right folder, but there's my Around Home. All those images are now moved over into my big Drobo drive, and Lightroom knows where they are. As long as you move it inside Lightroom's folder view here, this is my big Drobo, you're fine. All right, now all of a sudden you're fine. So, you know, that's the important thing. Never, ever, 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 ever move your Lightroom master files outside of Lightroom because the database won't know where they are. It'll still show you the JPEG previews it created for the files. The deal is, I can disconnect my catalog and take it with me on the road with my laptop and still light up and go through and organize and find images and create collections of images that aren't even connected, images that are on my Drobo. I just can't edit them. I just can't export them. It's made for me to be able to go through and look at drives that aren't even connected to the computer but that are in the database. So all I have to do is plug that drive in and all of a sudden there's the photos. As long as I don't ever move them or change their names in any way outside of the database, or else it'll lose them. All right, so on the topic of that database, we've talked about how to protect photos from being lost by moving them outside of that database, but how do we protect the database in case there's some kind of a glitch or a corruption? You know, I've got, as I showed, 25 years of images in here, 1996 to 2021. You know, what do I do to make sure that all the edits and all the work that I've done over all those years isn't lost by some corrupt file or losing my little Samsung drive that I carry around with me somehow? And that's just so critical in this whole process. So what I do is, you know, under File up here, or Edit for Windows. It's a little bit different Mac and PC, but you're gonna go find your preferences and you've got catalog settings. And when you go into there, it asks you about backup and it says backup catalog every time Lightroom exits. Well, that's what I'm gonna recommend you consider doing. I really wanna advocate for those of you out there working with Lightroom, getting one of these fast T7 SSD drives. I have those in my links, hudsonhenry.com/ATS links for both Amazon and B&H. They're not that expensive. They're super fast. You connect them to a fast port on your computer. You put your catalog on there, and then you back it up to your system hard drive or your backup drive on your computer. For me, I back it up every time I shut off my laptop on the laptop's hard drive. I back it up every time I shut down my desktop on my desktop's backup hard drive, where I keep all of my files that are backed up on another Drobo. So I have that set to every time Lightroom exits in the catalog settings here. Go ahead and cancel that. And then when I go ahead and I shut down Lightroom, this is the second most important tip. Never move the files outside of Lightroom's catalog, outside of the folder view in the library. You move files there, nowhere else. Rename them here. You know, you can transfer individual files. I can grab one photo and drag it into another folder. If you want to move stuff around, you need to do it in Lightroom. My position is do as minimal a moving of your master files as humanly possible. Put them where you want them to stay and keep them there. But if you move them, do it inside of Lightroom. Backing up that catalog is number 2. And when I shut down Lightroom, I say, yes, I do really want to quit. And then it asks me, it's not done with writing some changes to metadata. That's fine. I'm going to tell it to quit. And then it says, where are you going to back it up? Where are you going to back it up? This is my Drobo drive that I back everything up to on my system. I tell it to test the integrity of the catalog, optimize the catalog, and back that catalog up every time I shut down. And it's going to take a while. You can go off, you know, browse the internet, do something else on your computer, multitask, go, you know, get dinner or whatever. But every time I shut down Lightroom, if I've done any work that's significant on my catalog, I go ahead and I back it up. I have it test the catalog's integrity, and I also have it optimize the catalog. Now, it's not going to back up every single one-to-one preview that you have in Lightroom or smart previews. If you're a person that uses smart previews, that's all for a full-on organizing course that Rick and I are working on. But, you know, it is going to back up all the critical stuff, so it's really easy to rebuild to where you were before. You're not going to lose your edits. You're not going to lose your organization, your collections, your smart previews, your versions, all those kinds of things that you can do in Lightroom, your star ratings, any of that stuff. That's all going to be backed up by choosing to back it up. And I would really advocate having it backed up as many places as you can. I really love having it backed up on my laptop. You know, if there was a fire here in my home while I'm traveling, I still have my catalog both on this little drive where it resides and works really fast, as well as on the laptop's hard drive as a backup. And if something happened and someone stole my laptop with this little drive in the case, I still have it backed up on my Drobo here at home. I can rebuild it. Those things are just really critical. All right, so that's the moral of this particular approach in the scene for Lightroom users. Never move your files or rename them outside of Lightroom ever. Just think about those master RAW files and PSD files or TIFF files, those full resolution edited files, as gold that gets stored in the bank and never moved around. You know, if you want to create a throwaway JPEG to send off to a printer or to upload to Facebook or, you know, whatever it is you want to do, send it over email. Send that stuff outside. Don't catalog it. Just put it into a folder. I like Dropbox for that, just because I can access it on my phone or my tablet or my laptop or my PC or, you know, any place I can log on online and pull that photo out and send it off. So that's a good idea. But those master, full resolution, wide gamut editing images, keep those in a single spot, never move them. Build yourself a structure that works for you. It doesn't have to be mine. Mine's year and shoot. That's the only level that there is. Simple. Simple is what's best. And don't feel like you have to go back and do everything over from scratch. You just start working that way forward, and then as you work with older files, move them into your system. But don't ever work on moving them around outside of Lightroom, and always back your catalog up to different hard drives, not on the same hard drive, different hard drives. You're a hard drive failure away from catastrophe if it's on the same hard drive. And I would advocate, if you can, keeping a version of it off-site backed up as well. All right, so that's it for my sort of critical Lightroom tips for those of you exploring database cataloging. It's very, very powerful. Those are the two just booby traps waiting for the new person to come along and lose their photographs or lose all the work that they've done. Just really, really important stuff. Again, I hope you'll join me for Office Hours, May 11th, Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific. Sign up at hudsonary.com/office hours. Leave us a question, upload a spring image. We'll go through those images. It's going to be a lot of fun. I hope everyone is enjoying spring. Things are loosening up a little bit. Let's stay safe. Let's go out and be creative. And I'll see you next week.